So, good evening to everybody. The first thing I'd like to do is, because it's a short session, in lieu of a meditation, which is what I would normally have us do, I'd like us to just do 12 breaths of what is called yin breathing. And it really is just breathing in through your nose and sending the breath to the lower dantian, so about 4 inches below the navel, equidistant between the front and the back of the body. And you don't need to prolong it, but make it relaxed. So let's just be quiet and do this, at your own pace. And when I'm done, I'll start talking again. It will let yourself settle. That's the whole purpose of getting relaxed and feeling that we're coming together. Okay. Eyes closed, eyes open, doesn't matter. Okay, well, I am done and you can finish as you just keep going at your own pace if you're not finished. So, good evening. I'm Debbie, and as Deborah said, I'm an Akashic record reader, and she's right, I do all those other things as well. I've been doing the Akashic records for 12 years, and my teacher is Linda Howe, so it's I haven't worked with any other teachers. And so what you're going to be learning this evening is how she taught me, and the structure of the evening is going to be me talking and also experiential for you. I'm going to actually teach you how to read the records. And then I think we'll be in the records 3 times tonight. The third time is actually going to be incorporating some of these astrological concepts that I'll be talking about. I'm going to try for a 1 hour at the 1 hour mark for, maybe a 1 or 2 minute bio break if we need it. And I don't have a formal Q&A session planned. So if you have questions, just put them in the chat. I'll try to respond to them as they come up. And a lot of what I'm going to say is going to raise more questions than it answers, because it's a really big topic, right? They're both big topics. Astrology is a big topic. So, and kudos on all of you for being interested in astrology. I consider it to be the most demanding of all the modalities. Intellectually demanding, you need to be able to hold a lot of information, and you also you need to integrate it and to have it come out the other end making some sense, right? So I have been working with astrology longer than the Akashic records. I'm not a crash hot astrologer. I don't know about the finer points of sidereal solar returns or something like that. But I've been working in the records as with other people. I was finding that there were some kind of intuitive astrological references coming into my readings. For example, perhaps a client would be explaining some really difficult situation, and I would go, that just smacks of Uranus, Mars, or something like that, right? And from there were times I've done this more than once, excuse me, where I would say, well, give me your birth data. And after the reading is over, I'll take a quick look at your chart. And so I did that. So eventually from there, I developed this. I don't ask every client for their astrological data, but if it seems like it will be helpful during the course of the reading, I will take a look at some specific things. What I'm looking at tonight with you will be the sun, the moon, and the north node. But you can look at so many other things, and I'll be giving you with the recording, there will be some handouts that will also contain those other things, like looking for Mars transits, looking for Saturn return, though a standalone Saturn return is quite rare, right? There can be a lot of other things happening. I was having Pluto square my sun during my Saturn return, so and the other thing that's going to happen tonight is we're going to be doing personal work in the records. But as I've been talking, you can see that there's great scope if you're already working with other people to incorporate this when you're working with others. So if those of you, somebody mentioned about having already worked in the records, for those of you who haven't, this is going to be a good opportunity to see if you resonate with this work. You get it, whether you want to explore it further. So let's get started with the records. The short definition I use is that they are a dimension of consciousness that contains the vibrational imprint of the soul on its journey. And how this works is that everyone on Earth has their own set of records, and within the records, we have the lords of the records who oversee all the records and never interface with humans. And then within our own particular records, we have a master. So it's one soul, one master. You get that for the entirety of your journey. I'm not going to really hit the metaphysics here, because that could take some time, and the master calls in teachers. So we're always working on something. We're always working, we have a path. The presumption is there's an evolutionary path or a path to redemption, a place, maybe it's a spiritual path that will take us home. So the perspective of the records is, the overlay is how using the records, working in the records would be, how could I have an experience of my soul's perfection while I am in a human body, right? This is a spiritual kind of concern. It's for people. I include myself in both of these. If you're spiritually oriented, it can be because you just look around at this world and this is me. I'm like, this can't be right. There's too much suffering. It doesn't make any sense. We can't, all the things we throw at our problems, nothing works. There are always problems that, we box ourselves in, or, Israel, that's been going on for millennia, right? So you just like, there's got to be something more than this, especially if the suffering is personal, right? And then some people are just naturally oriented to that realm, right? And I can say, I'm like that too. I can go up like a hot air balloon. And some people have a fiery, I'm going elemental on you, right? I have a fiery sense of spirituality. So we're thinking, when we think records, we think spirituality, but really one of the reasons why I love working in the records is because not many other modalities do give you that top level, big picture perspective on how this could be good for you. How does it advance? How does it teach you to accept uh, and live with what's happening in the world and not let it crush you, right? And but it's also very practical. So, it's kind of like the information you get in the records kind of crosses a spectrum from the very what happens if I take this job to um, how should I continue now that my spiritual teacher is no longer on the planet or something, right? There's, something at the other end. And in between, all your relationships, the work we do, our kids, all of that. And that makes it very compatible with astrology because astrology addresses a very wide range of issues, right? The 12 houses pretty much cover it, right? And so it's got that elegant structure to it. Now, I work in tropical Western astrology. I'm guessing that you all do as well. Um, but I've done the rounds with sidereal and Vedic astrology. Not that I ever learned how to be a practitioner, but I've had readings. And Vedic tends to be more predictive. Some aspects of sidereal tend to be predictive. Tropical Western is more psychological in nature. It's psycho-spiritual, it can be, right? And this makes it a perfect interface with the record. So that's another reason why I really like combining the two. So my teacher has said that the records are the convergent zone of wisdom, power, and love. So that's a nice sound bite. She said that our job as readers is to fall in love with our clients. So and that applies even if you're reading your own records, right? And one of the reasons why I've continued over all these years is because it's really true. It happens naturally. It's very easy. You fall into when you enter the space, you fall into a kind of a finer vibration of seeing people through the light of no judgment, of acceptance and love, right? And it doesn't mean that, you love them in a gooey way, even if they've done something horrible. And, you close the records and you go back to being normal. We're not talking about getting uh, all kumbaya, light and love, that kind of thing. It's a very, um, it can be a very ordinary process. And that sense of love can be very subtle, right? But it's, it's, it really is a training in compassion and uh it's good practice just to work in the records. So that's another reason to be open to the experiment that we're going to do tonight. So now it's a good time to share screen. Let's see, what have I got? Yeah, good. I did it. The way we access the records is through the pathway prayer. It has two parts. And I know that there was not a way to get handouts to you before the class. Hopefully you can read what's on the screen. the only thing to know about this prayer is it's not, there's a couple of things to know. In a few minutes, I'm going to have us do just a very quick in and out of the records. We're going to say that first paragraph, and so we'll say that out loud once in its entirety. And I don't think we'll.
Debbie, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Debbie, we can't hear you. We lost your screen and then you went silent on us.
I think I crashed. I'm very sorry.
Okay.
Came right back.
That's okay. That's okay.
Let me get that the prayer back. I live in a rural area, so sometimes I've got everything closed on my computer, but sometimes I think the Wi-Fi doesn't hold up. So
We understand completely. No worries.
Yeah. So that first paragraph we say out loud in its entirety. You can recite it out loud, and then the second one, because we're opening our own records, we recite that out loud. Then the third one, when we're at help me to know myself, the first you use the pronoun myself. You say it out loud once using the pronoun myself. And then you say it twice more to yourself using your full name, your legal name. The legal name would be what it is you're using now. If it's changed since you were born, just use whatever is on your driver's license or your passport or something like that. And then you say the records are now open. And from there, I will guide you all the way. You're welcome to explore it on your own, but I will also be giving you the prompts on what to do when the records are open. So I'm essentially throwing you into the deep end of the pool right away. But why not? This isn't an intellectual exploration. This is experiential. So, okay. Well, let's get ready to read the prayer. And so we do acknowledge the forces of light, asking for guidance, direction, and courage to know the truth, as it is revealed for our highest good and the highest good of everyone connected to us. O Holy Spirit of God, protect me from all forms of self-centeredness and direct my attention to the work at hand. Help me to know myself in the light of the Akashic Records, to see myself through the eyes of the Lords of the Records, and enable me to show the wisdom and compassion that the masters, teachers, and loved ones of me have for me. And now twice more using your legal name silently. And when you're done, say out loud, the records are now open. Okay, so take a moment to settle into yourself physically. You want to open your awareness to, you're just observing. You're not trying to do anything. You're just observing. You don't necessarily need to see if where you are now feels different from where you were a few minutes ago. You just want to make note of how you feel, what your body is doing, and then gradually start to become aware of the space around you. This can be with eyes closed or eyes open. If there are those of you who would like to make notes while you're doing this, go right ahead and do that. You want to just explore the space. It could be what's there? Is there anything in your mind's eye that you're being shown? Very important to remember there is no wrong way to do this. Whatever is happening now is exactly what is supposed to be happening. As you're exploring, see if you can tune into the atmosphere in which you find yourself. This is the atmosphere of the Akasha. Is it any different? Could be very subtle. And keep in mind that what moves energy in the records is to describe. As you're observing, you might want to have a little running narrative of, oh, this is, oh, okay, noticing this, noticing that. So you're describing what's happening or what's not happening. And again, it does not matter what it is. If it's completely ordinary, that is totally what it's supposed to be. And now see if you can get a sense of the presence of any beings within this space. They could be your master or your teachers together, or loved ones. I will explain that when we are finished here. Not necessarily as distinct with strong identities and names, but as kind of a grouping, perhaps. Maybe off to the side, maybe you're at a table and they're across from you. Or maybe you just feel them. See, or maybe you don't. But see if you can get a sense of that. A sense of a supportive presence, right? And so now, as we reside within our own records, realizing that we're here for greater illumination and wisdom and guidance, right? This is intentional, conscious, deliberate. We're active participants in a very specific initiation, moving from one level of awareness to another. And so that way we become focal points of receptivity, points of light. And our very awareness of these points of light amplifies the light. The Akasha teaches us that the core of our being is imbued with light. And that light radiates and shines through every human frailty or vulnerability. shining out into the world. See if you can allow the light to shine out from you. Beautiful. Okay. So we're going to make this a very short session, and we're going to close the records. So below the opening prayer is the closing prayer. This one is said out loud in its entirety just once. I would like to thank the masters, teachers, and loved ones for their love and compassion. I would like to thank the lords of the Akashic Records for their point of view. And I would like to thank the Holy Spirit of Light for all knowledge and healing. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. Okay, so some of you, I don't know if you want to make notes, take a few moments for that. I just kind of throw the question out there. How was that? If anybody wants to share. And you can unmute yourself if you want to just, I think we're a small enough group, so I don't need to call on you. If you start talking, I'll shut up. How's that? And I can continue to talk in terms of giving you more information about what you've just done. The prayer has allowed you to make the transition from one state of consciousness to another. And generally speaking, the atmosphere of the Akasha is finer and quicker, as a lot of these states are. The prayer is very powerful. It's a major reason why I still read the records. I can feel the power of the prayer. And yeah, Shannon, she sensed the air was more bubbly. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the prayer itself initiates not just the transition to the records, but over time, information starts coming through as almost as soon as you start saying it, right? For those who are kind of scratching their heads, if there are, it depends. I've seen, I said it a couple of times. Whatever your experience was, please validate it. Don't second guess it. Yes, thank you, Lisa. Calming and relaxing and very supportive. Yes. And I have to, oh gosh, Lauren, I have no idea what I'm familiar with Rosicrucianism, but not what you're eth. I don't know what that is. If somebody else knows, please go ahead and let us know. Yeah. I'll just make a note of that actually. I'll tell you that when I went into my own records for the first time, I was really expecting, I had a preconceived idea or desire that it would be like a kind of a cosmic Hogwarts, that it would be one of these very fun places with a lot of candy for my mind's eye, and all it's ever really been for me is I feel like almost like a ceiling of light gets lowered onto me. One of the
You know,
things that can, Mm,
Debbie, I found when I started using this prayer and doing the Akashic records that everybody does the what you ex what the how they records speak to you is different for everyone.
that's
I
right.
think some people they talk to them, some people you can see things. For me, I feel it. I literally
Yes.
feel I'll get hot or I'll get cold or I'll feel full of trembles or I'll feel full of, I mean, I feel all of these emotions and these sensations. And I think that's the one thing everyone has to remember is we all, when you go in there, how it interfaces with you could be a multitude of different ways.
Yes.
Yes.
And different each time, right? Uh, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and Willow, yeah, this is so common, Rosa books. The library, right? That's really common. The library, and sometimes there's another common one is kind of like a hall, a giant hall. But it's also very common for having it be a feeling, right? When I'm doing these initial like forays into the records, it's very much exploratory. But the records, the way I've been taught to work in them is about getting help, right? So, you know, we have an intention, usually a question. That's actually what we're going to be doing in a few minutes here. We're going to go into the records with a question, and I'll kind of give you the prompts of going through that. And then you're seeing how you get information. It's worth telling you that you do not have to be intuitive to access the records. Um, this is a spiritual resource for everybody. Historically, it was very confined to elites or somebody who's, you know, very special. And then it was clergy only. And um, that changed with Edgar Casey in the 20th century, you know, through the mid-century that he worked. He had a very long career because he was an ordinary person that learned to access the records. What's the guy's name? The head of ARE. I forget his name. Wrote a book on Edgar Casey on the Akashic Records. And the work he did is very similar to the kind of work that Linda teaches. You know, you're helping people who have situations that are very resistant to, it's kind of like us being the last house on the left. You know, I tried everything and I can't, um, by altering, by getting a good hit of unconditional acceptance for the plight of being human and learning that whatever is going on does not affect the perfection of who we actually are as souls. Yeah, okay. So Willow has a question if it's done before bed. I had a friend who she's a mystic, she's a shaman. And so she said, I'm going to open the records before bed and see if it affects my dreams. And really what happens is you just fall out of the records. It's easy to fall out of the records if you don't continue to keep the connection going. You can use the records for, and I do this, for getting a hit of peace and light, right? Um, but it's easy to get, to trail off, and it's a big space, right? There's a lot there. So um, if you go to sleep, then that conscious connection will be severed. That that said, there's a lot you can do when you're sleeping, right? There's a lot of amazing work we can do on ourselves, with lucid dreaming and that sort of thing, right? So the the way that uh I've been taught, there's some guidelines. Um have an intention before you open the records. Be responsible. You'll get a copy of this. Be responsible for your time in the records. She says, don't drink alcohol or take drugs 24 hours before you're in the records. That is because it is such a big space and it is so fine and amorphous that having a tight container is important. Now, I'm not the Akashic Record Police, so, whatever you've done, and you had no way of knowing. But if you're going to be doing a lot of work in the records, it's a very good idea to have a good clear head. Be very grounded. Being grounded after you are in the records, yeah, right. Well, you can experiment. I'm just kind of going back to what Willow put in the chat. Experimenting, don't take me at my word that you're going to fall out of the records if you open the records before you go to sleep. Try it out and see what happens. One of the beauties of working in the records is this is a relationship that you develop. You're developing a relationship with your master and your teachers. And for example, when we have loved ones, I'm just going to say this very quickly. Loved ones are the ones who will show up in the records, who you have known in this life, but who are no longer in a body. Linda has said time and again that they really don't have much of a role to play in transmitting information. That's for the master and the teachers, but they're there to just kind of say hi or I love you. That was never my experience. What happened was spirits were showing up all the time in the records, and I didn't know what to do about it, but I worked out. I took training I had already been training in mediumship, and so I took training in the British style. It's very organized, it's very step oriented, and I devised a way of shifting energy so I wasn't receiving information simultaneously from the records and from the spirit. So that's what I do. And I don't know of anybody else who practices like that, but it works for me. So there's the loved ones are there. But you can make there's a lot. If this was a 9-hour certification class, we'd spend a whole module on other ways to use the records. I use tarot in the records from time to time. I use mediumship. I do this, obviously. There are people who use the records and create art. Some people write. It's unlimited what you can do. I do have a class. It's no longer up on Learn It Live, but I'll probably put it up again on working with animals in the records. You can read the records of animals. You can read the records of cities and towns and even your home if you own it or it's in the public domain, right? So there's lots and lots of possibilities if this is something that interests you. How are we doing for time? I think that this would be a good time to go into the records again. I could keep talking, but I really would like you to have a second experience before I shift over to the astrological end of things. For this one, please start thinking about a situation that you would like to look at. It's better if it does not have a yes or no answer to it, that you want to get additional insight. The records are really good for providing big picture or insights you didn't expect or insights from other places, right? We tend to be this is the way I see things, but the records can show you the viewpoint of another person or, how different ways of perceiving things. So, I'll go back to share screen. And as we did before, that it's the third stanza that you have to remember. The second and third time you want to recite silently using your full name. Okay, so let's do this. Oh, and there's one other thing I want to give you a heads up about. I'm going to give you a little bit of a structure to look at the situation. It's a little advanced, but if I'm prompting you, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. It's called the 3 stages of healing. So basically, I'm going to ask you to describe the situation that you've decided to work with. And then I am going to ask you, and that'll be you telling the records. The records, your master and teachers are not going to be talking to you. And then you're going to look at the causes and conditions. And the causes and conditions, you want to tell the master and teachers what you know about the causes and conditions. And then you would be receiving from the master and teachers information about causes and conditions. And then the third part is going to be the soul level truth. You are going to ask in the records, what is the soul level truth here? How can this situation that is so difficult give me an experience of the perfection of my own soul? So I'll fill all this in when you're doing it, but I just wanted to give you the heads up that that's coming. Okay. And so we do acknowledge the forces of light, asking for guidance, direction, and courage to know the truth, as it is revealed for our highest good and the highest good of everyone connected to us. O Holy Spirit of God, protect me from all forms of self-centeredness and direct my attention to the work at hand. Help me to know myself in the light of the Akashic Records, to see myself through the eyes of the Lords of the Records, and enable me to share the wisdom and compassion that the masters, teachers, and loved ones of me have for me. Now, twice more using your current legal name. The records are now open. Okay, so as before, get that awareness of yourself, eyes open, eyes closed. You want to experiment. Maybe take notes. If you don't want to, take notes later. Being aware of, is this any different from the first time? You have the physical sense of yourself, and then gradually moving out in a concentric circle, expanding your awareness of your surroundings. What might be there? Getting a sense for the atmosphere of the Akasha. Okay, how do you feel it? And along those lines, can you feel a supportive presence, the presence of the master and the teachers, and maybe the loved ones? Perhaps there's a group. If not, don't worry about it. Whatever your experience is, that's exactly the way it should be. We will add a little bit of something we didn't do the last time. We're going to ask the masters and teachers to facilitate our movement to the center zone of our records. The center zone is the place where much of the work is done. There are several places where we work in the records. You may already be there. If so, then you're not going anywhere. If you feel that they're going to move you, pay attention to how that happens, right? Is it a Star Trek thing, with a teleporter, or have you been picked up, or did they say, come this way? Just see what that's like. And now we want to start with the first part of this. You want to take the situation that you brought with you and start describing it to your master and teachers. Don't hold back. All let the dirty laundry hang out. If you've got some, if you're aggrieved, if you've got some bad feelings about it, if you're mad at somebody, don't worry about it. You're not going to be judged for it. Let it all, let them know what it is, as well as the facts. And now you can, you're probably already starting to move to the causes and conditions. So you can start telling them what you think happened, or what perhaps it's a physical situation, and dietary oversight, or whatever it is. You say your piece about causes and conditions, and then ask them, what do you have to say about this? Do you have any insight? Anything I don't know about these causes and conditions? I'll give you a little bit more time for that. Okay, and so now let's oh, I'm sorry, I had another crash. It was very momentary. So now let's go to the third part of this. The soul level truth. The question is always, how can this situation contribute to the sense of the perfection of my soul, of what it's like to be a perfect being while I am in a human body? This is where all of the healing takes place, almost all of it. Can you accept what happened to you, knowing that there's a part of you that will never be touched by what happened? That the perfection of who you are, you take it on faith now. We don't experience it all the time, but we sense it. Spiritual seekers long for this, right? And we understand that if we hold on to something, then it will keep us from that sense of our own perfection, right? The master and teachers are never going to say, you did it wrong. They are always going to say, there's nothing you can do that is going to make a bit of difference in who you really are.
Think we might have lost Debbie again. Just give her a second. She seems to always reappear.
Okay, I'm back again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so, oh, good idea. Okay, so we're going to close up our records because you had that time to look at that. And I am going to close your records for you. Because she disabled the screen sharing, which may have been causing the crashing. So I will say the closing prayer for all of us. I would like to thank the masters, teachers, and loved ones for their love and compassion. I would like to thank the lords of the Akashic Records for their point of view, and I would like to thank the Holy Spirit of Light for all knowledge and healing. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. Okay. So, Deborah, what I think we could do when we do the last time in the records, I'll put the prayer up briefly and take it right down as soon
Okay.
as, yeah.
Okay. Or I could share it with them. Do you want me to pull it up and share like a copy of it with them?
That would be fine. Yeah.
Okay. I will put a link in the chat for them.
Oh,
Yeah. Because I have it. I'm well aware of it. So let me share a link with them in the chat.
oh, cool. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So, this was a crash course in the heart of the Akashic Records. It's you got the accelerated version. And from what I could see in the chat earlier, it seems like you're keeping up with me just fine. So that's wonderful. And if anybody has anything to share, you're welcome. You're welcome to just pipe up and say something or put it in the chat. This gives you a chance to see what can happen when you actually go with a question, right? And you get that sense. A lot of people will say, how do I know I'm not making this up? And I could have said this whether I was in the records or not. But that's one of the reasons why the classes give you so much practice. And there's actually one exercise that pits going into the records versus intuition, so that you can see that it really does contain a lot of information and a lot of support. again, more than anything, this is about building a relationship with a reliable source of support and guidance. So this is also a good time. We're coming to the 1 hour mark. If anybody needs a bio break, I'm going to go and grab something to drink in case my voice gets funky again, and I will be back in about a minute. So, and then we'll start talking about astrology. Okay. Okay, so I'm back. Now, so how this goes, there's so many ways to weave astrology into this. They're so compatible, but I'm just sticking to that sun sign, moon, and north node. For me, it's obvious reasons because one of the most common questions I get when I'm reading the records is, what's my life purpose? And so these have a lot of clues, especially North Node, that's like tailor-made for that. Sun sign is who you are, at your core, right? It's not ascendant. It's not how it's not how you appear to the world. It's about the core of your being. And the moon, of course, is the center of your heart, your emotional life. You could really use anything, but I'm going to fly through a primer and assume that you already are conversant with a lot of this. So what we're doing now is personal work, and hopefully it's your own birth time. If you don't, your moon might be a little bit off. Just a very quick talk about that. If you don't know your own birth time and you put your information into one of these apps, then you'll have a moon sign. The one way to check it, I don't know if anybody even uses these anymore. I think they're all online, but here's an ephemeris, right? This one is from 2000 to 2050, and this one is from the last century. I use these all the time. And so you look up the day you were born and see what sign the moon was in and see if it changed signs, because the moon changes signs every few days. So you can get pretty close to what your moon is, or if you're working with somebody else that way, if you don't have the birth time. And so one teacher has said that planets are the actors and signs are the clothes that they wear. Planets really, are so much of what astrology is about. And so the sun is really who you are. The moon is it orbits around the sun. It's called a planet, but it's so connected to the sun. North Node is something else completely. And I think I'm going to leave it at there. The handouts really have the cheat sheets, and I'm sure there's lots of information about all this stuff. And even if you're not an astrologer, most people know about sun signs. So what's really helpful is to understand the difference between the personal planets and the outer planets. Oh, how nice. Yeah. I use Astrodienst when I'm doing charts, but there's so many places, thank you for that, Deborah. And no, you don't need to provide planetary positions. We are going to talk about natal versus transits. And we're going to focus right now on natal charts. And right now, but there's a difference between the personal planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and then the outer planets. They're all very important to us, but the personal planets hit us the most directly, right? So once you've understood where the planets what signs they're in, you know, and then you kind of get the attributes of that. I'm going to use myself as an example, you know, because I'll be the guinea pig, right? I have Moon in Libra, so I have a good sense of that. The next thing we want to do is check the aspects, the natal aspects of the Sun, Moon, and North Node. And so for me, my moon is square my Mars. It's not tight. It's 6 degrees. So it's still in orb. It's not like right on each other. But it's still in orb. It's not very wide. So that I was a crabby little girl, right? That can give you a crabby temperament. It can also give you problems with your mother. That was present for me. So you want to be looking for, you know, Moon in Virgo could be problems with the mother, who knows? So you want to be looking at what the contact is, right? The main ones, I'm sure you know these: the conjunction, the trine, the opposition, the thank you, Lauren. Yeah. Sagittarius, Moon, and Taurus. Yeah. Moon in Taurus, there's a lot of action in Taurus these days. A lot of planets in Taurus right now. So your moon's getting heavy action, right? Or had. So you have, you know, right through the sextile, the 5 ones are conjunction, the trine. Yeah, you know all this. And then the other ones they have an effect, but they don't have quite as much of an effect. So, but you're looking for contact. That's the main thing. And some people don't care what the contact is. If there's contact, then you know, some people don't interpret squares as malefics, right? Some people think that any contact can be will create the friction that you need for growth, right? And then there are the houses, right? And if you're working with houses, you know, every astrologer places different emphasis. I place a lot of emphasis on the houses, but I know a lot of people who don't. And but the other part of this is, no matter what it is, whether it's a planet with its attributes that, you know, we think of, you need to know the planet's cold, right? Or the sun, or the signs, or the aspects, or the houses. They come in octaves, right? There's and this is why this is essential when we're working with astrology in the records. Every sign has its high expression and its low expression, right? Every house has its high expression and low expression. So, for example, the most obvious expression of the 4th house would be the home, right? And that's an outer thing. But there's also the inner workings of the self. It always comes back to the self. Again, this tropical Western astrology is psycho-spiritual, is psychological. So we really do go into these things. And if you're not having necessarily problems with your home, Pluto's going to move into my 4th house, right? Then it's going to be an excavation and a reforming of who I am in an internal way. You want to keep that in mind when you're looking at life purpose, even for yourself, right? There's so much insight you can get from astrology if you allow that scale to go back and forth, back and forth. It can be very practical, and it can be very psychological. You don't want to overdo it too much in parsing out. I'm sure you found this. If you worry it to death which I have, you're going to get confused, and because nothing's going to be fully consistent. Astrology is pretty organized, right? But it's if you kind of work it to death or worry it to death, it's not going to give you what you need. So now the records really does specialize more than any other modality in soul development and evolution, but it also acknowledges, it's very layered. You can go down right through, and I said this earlier, the relationships and all the way down to the more practical. So similarly, if you're looking into your chart to see, is it time to move or whatever, that's a very practical sort of thing, right? The technique of actually bringing the sun and the moon and the north node into the records is similar to what we just did. You're taking a situation, and then you're asking questions about it. But you're also kind of asking, well, what does my sun sign have to say? Do you have any good information? Do the records have any information via the qualities of the sun sign, right? What does the sun sign have to want me to know? It's similar to a technique that was taught to me by a really amazing medical intuitive. She called it running the rainbow, where you asked the same question of all the different chakras, right? This is somewhat similar. So then, and you go down to the moon. What does the moon have to say? A very different perspective. The moon's going to be giving you, that emotional, that heart, and also whatever stress it's under, right? So the records, you may be aware. What does the sun have to say now that Pluto's sitting right on it or something, right? So I'm not here to answer. North Node in Scorpio. Yeah. I'm not here to answer those questions, to answer the you're going to find those answers for yourself in your records. That's the whole point of what we're doing today, right? Another thing I wanted to say is that the natal chart is not engraved in stone, and we can outgrow our natal aspects. I don't know if any of you have found this. For example, just to go back and use that Moon square Mars aspect, natal aspect I have, and the difficulty with the mother, I worked my tail off to heal that. And that is no longer, that's just not an issue anymore in my life. What has become an issue is that it's gone to another octave, and now I'm more aware of how current do I stay with my own emotions? What are my mothering tendencies, my self-mothering tendencies? It's something that I work on. I mean, and that's spiritual work, right? Right there. But there can also be other aspects that are just, they never come to fruition, right? You can look at a chart and you go, oh, look at that, there's Pluto Mars or something. No, criminal or something. But it could be somebody who's a prominent person and very successful, right? Who has made the best use of that particular aspect. So we can't prejudge. We only know that these are the tools that people have. And really that attitude that whatever the contact is in a chart, if it creates friction creates growth, right? You may have heard I've heard from several teachers that people who have a lot of Jupiter in their charts, end up, being homeless on the street, which is, I don't want to talk in cliches, but without enough need to do something, you may not make the best of it. That Jupiter transits are notorious that you don't feel them because they're so comfortable, they kind of like go unnoticed, right? You feel a Pluto transit, right? You feel a Saturn, right? And then this is just my thing, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I have personally categorized charts into 3 groups. The first is, wow, I get it. I understand this person, this person comes to life in this chart. This is just, yeah. So then I think I'm really a great astrologer. Then the second one is, oh, okay, I have to think about this. I have to sit with this. And then the chart reveals its secrets. My sister is a better astrologer than I am, and she has talked about this process where she sits with it and then it just starts to talk to her, right? And then the third is WTF. It's just like, you can look at this chart and turn it upside down and it still doesn't make any sense. And those take the longest, but they can be the most rewarding, right? If you really give it time and energy. So I would love to know if anybody else feels that way about looking at charts. Um, oh, let's see. Yeah, Drake has Pluto Mars. It's looking at that. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. So yeah, when we're talking about transit, so when you're in the records, um, taking my prompts, you may be aware of, because we're gonna, I'll ask you to look at the sun, bring that to the masters and teachers. What pressure or what's touching your sun right now? What's touching your moon right now? And what's happening with your North Node? A word about North Node is it's not up there, it's not headline news, right? It's not sexy like, the big sun, moon, all that. But it does have a lot of good information, especially because the North Node, I'm sure the North Node, South Node are opposites, right? So North Node is what you're supposed to be doing. South Node is what you've been doing. And if you get familiarity, if you get to know yourself from the perspective of, from an astrological perspective, you can almost see where you default back when the task of the North Node is like really getting you down and you're just like, the hell with it. I'm going back to, I'm going to default to the way I used to do things. Moon transits to the 12th house would be most accessible. How so, Deborah?
Yeah. Well, look, can you ask the question, in
Oh.
your opinion, are the records more accessible during moon transits to the South Node, the 12th house, or the 4th house? And I would think that it would be the 12th, because the 12th would be the things that are hidden within us, our subconscious. And I would think then if you had your moon and you were trying to make those connections, that when it was transiting that 12th house, going into the records during that short, although it'd only be a couple day period of time, might give you more opportunity to have that connection with the records that could get you more information about your undoings or the things that are hidden within you that you don't know, that you really want to know, that you might access that subconscious information.
I love that. Yes. So by all means, I would never have thought of that. So I think that that's really a wonderful approach. And yes, absolutely experiment. Yeah. Yeah, all about life purpose. Yes. I have some cheat sheets in the handouts about North Node and South Node. So, with the houses. So hopefully that will be helpful for you, Lisa. Oh, Kenya, yeah. So there we are, right? Yeah. Um, what and when you're talking about the hidden, you're talking about intuition, you're talking about right brain. And my moon is in the 12th house, by the way, conjunct my Neptune and Mercury, all in the 12th. So I'm a gaseous, dreamer, right? I go into right brain very easily. Right brain is the subconscious, right? And it's bigger than that. If any of you have ever read My Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolte Taylor, she had a stroke and she's an I think she's a neurologist, and she had this killer stroke that completely shut down her left brain, and all she had was her right brain, and she was in the greatest bliss she'd ever been in, and it lasted a long time, but she had to relearn left brain functions completely. The left brain is also, right brain is also the repository. Subconscious is the repository of trauma, of our unprocessed experience, of all of that, and that's very good to bring up and meet, right? When it's kind of in shadow, we get scared of it, and when we bring it out and process fully, which is usually a very physical, emotional, how many ways you can cry? There's our body can release emotion and trauma in ways that in countless ways. And a lot of psychotherapists are discovering how to work with patients in that way. And it is if trauma therapy that used left brain, like cognitive behavioral or something like that, if that worked, everybody would be doing it, but it doesn't. You could tell your left brain all day long not to be afraid of that particular thing because it reminds you of something in your childhood, and it doesn't make a bit of difference. But if you're able to connect with the full emotion that you were unable to experience at the time in safety, right? Then you process and release it. And when the veils are thin, then and you're talking about a situation, moon transits to the 12th. That's when the veils are very thin. And when you're in the records, you have support. So yeah. You guys are incredible. Your records can teach you about your inner child and hidden wounds, wounds that you need to heal from. Yes. The what the psychotherapists that work with trauma have found is that their presence, their supportive presence, and their unyielding compassion is what helps people heal, right? That there's no need to hide from the experience, that it's surrounded by support and love, right? That's the definition of the records, right? But it depends on how, if you're willing to go it, quote unquote, alone without, the backup of a human. But if you to get into a relationship with your records that you feel is, you feel that support, then that will happen naturally. The nice thing about working with these unhealed wounds is that the body decides, we don't decide. My left brain doesn't go, hey, down there, I want that time from November 8th, 1968. Come on up. We want to look at that. That's not going to happen. The body is only going to release and allow if it feels safe, if it feels like it's okay. So that's a built-in safeguard. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mercury is weak in Pisces. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, if you want, yeah, there's so many markers for it, beautifully fluid. Yes, there's so many markers for really that kind of intelligence, and it's not appreciated enough, right? Geniuses are, more often misunderstood because they're not thinking, at lockstep, which is unfortunately that's how we've become. Yeah. So, are there any questions about this? I've left out a lot. And goodness knows, it seems like you guys already know a lot. I've been telling you stuff that you already know. Um, I will tell you a few things, which I'm sure you already know. We're doing Sun, Moon, and North Node. It's worth keeping an eye on Mars. Mars is a hit and run planet, but it can do a lot of damage, right? If you're in a Mars transit, even if it's only 4 days, yikes. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. It's worth keeping an eye on the lucky ones. The lucky ones don't always give up the goods, but anything with Venus and Jupiter, Venus, Jupiter, Uranus. We just had that beautiful Uranus Jupiter conjunction, still feeling it, right? Saturn returns are always, I can't tell you how many clients come to me who are either 28 or 29 or 58, 59. And I know that a lot of other things can be going on, but it's so telltale, right? So keeping an eye on Saturn. Saturn, if you're predisposed to, I'm being very nice to you guys, but I can be, I'm pretty much of a loner and I'm sort of crabby. So I get along with Saturn really well. I like Saturn, yeah. So all of those, and I think I've put on some of these little kind of pointers, but you probably already, and it could be anything, if you are, this is what we're going to do in a few minutes is a sample of what can be done, but use your imagination. It sounds like some of you are already off to the races with all of the possibilities, right? Okay, so does anybody have any questions about any of this before we go into the records again? Um, I think I would like to just go ahead and do this. I could talk, oh, I'm not sure I think of it that way. What I generally, the question that Kenya has is, are the records more accessible through the South Node or North Node? I do it the other way around. I open the records and then I ask in the records for information through the, for more information about what the North Node influence is, the South Node influence. But the further up the chat, it was more about what kind of timing would make the would you want to pick a particular moon transit? I can't imagine that I would. I mean, I've never actually timed how I access the records according to what's happening astrologically. I do it completely the other way around. So if you think that this is a good idea, I think that that's really there's something that you could try. So what do you need to know for your sun, moon, and north node? Know where your sun is, know if is it in, are there any transits? Same thing with the moon, same thing with the north node. Depending on what your question is, they might have different roles to play. Yeah, houses, aspects, signs, and yeah, it depends. Yeah, it's the potential here. I just kind of front load this a bit, is for the opening up of perspective. One thing leads to another. When I'll give you an example. I get questions about relationships all the time, and it doesn't matter what kind of relationships. It can be romantic relationships, it can be distressed relationships with family members, whatever. Somebody's fighting with their friend, or but one of the things I always ask in the records is, how does this fit in with their soul's evolution? And that previous, and this is more practical than how does this give me a an experience of my soul's perfection, because you could almost have the same answer every time, but that it's that you have compassion for yourself and acceptance of what's going on, except that has to be felt rather than said, wrote. But one of the things that I've seen in the records when we get to that is that people may choose jobs that have a certain kind of boss that resembles a father, and that gets shown to me. Or people want to recreate a favorite kind of grouping. And so they find themselves in that kind of group all the time, with its pluses and its minuses. And each time, I never look at things as going around in circles. I look at them as spirals. We don't know what another's path is, other than if somebody's going around in circles, you got to respect that they need to do it, right? And eventually they will spiral up. But our purpose is never to pretend that we know where somebody needs to go with something, right? But just to add a little bit more, or to know where you need to go, right? To go ahead and say, oh, this is not where I should be. Sometimes that's life-saving, but a lot of times it's very self-critical. And you get a lot more traction out of being very accepting of what it is you're doing. You say, geez, I wish I didn't eat that second piece of lasagna or something. But it's serving a purpose. And so understanding what the purpose is and having compassion for that is a lot more effective than giving ourselves a wrist slap, right? Anyway, so I went off on a little rant there. Let's do this. Let's go into the records. I don't know, Deborah, do you want to put up should I put up the?
You can. I will give you access here, and we'll hope we don't lose you.
Okay. Cross your fingers, everybody. Okay. And so we do acknowledge the forces of light, asking for guidance, direction, and courage to know the truth, as it is revealed for our highest good and the highest good of everyone connected to us. O Holy Spirit of God, protect me from all forms of self-centeredness and direct my attention to the work at hand. Help me to know myself in the light of the Akashic Records, to see myself through the eyes of the Lords of the Records, and enable me to share the wisdom and compassion that the masters, teachers, and Okay. Say it twice more to yourself. I'm going to say it out loud so you can follow along, but use your given name. Help me to know who you are in the light of the Akashic Records, to see through the eyes of the Lords of the Records, and enable me to show the wisdom and compassion that the masters, teachers, and loved ones of you have for you. Okay, so the records are now open. As before, we want to do what this is settling into our physical self, opening our awareness, that observational quality, going out on all directions around us, the space, the atmosphere, the sense of a supportive presence. Perhaps making connection with master and teachers. And then the transport, if you're not already in the center zone, ask your master and teachers to facilitate the move there. Now, instead of immediately asking our question, this time we are going to create a pillar of light about an arm's length in front of us. So it's going to be wide enough to hold your physical self, the width, and it's going to go all the way up as far as you can see, and it's going to go all the way down to the center of the earth. And so we want to put ourselves in it. We want to put ourselves in this pillar of light. And so you're kind of, this is awareness being aware of itself. We're bifurcating ourselves. And this awareness is also going to contain the viewpoint of our sun sign. So there's you in the pillar, and then there's you looking at the pillar from the viewpoint of the sun sign, and your master and your teachers are helping you. Do the best that you can. It's a bit of a trick, but really just think about, how do I embody my sun sign? What characteristics are there about me that makes me a pure Aquarius or whatever? And when you're doing it, also notice the high and the low aspects of the sun sign. Whether that could be the indecisiveness of a Libra, being one of the lower expressions, and then there could be the that ability to bring people together, which could be one of the higher expressions. There's so many different qualities. So you want to spend a little bit of time doing that. Then bring in also the house that your sun is in. How do you manifest or express the sun in that house? The sun in that sign, in that house. Is it a particular, does it help you with your goals in life? Are there hindrances? You might want to just do a quick check on, does it help you with whatever your spiritual progress is? Does it help you in terms of your relationships or your ability to, in your profession, or perhaps as a parent. And then you might be aware, of course, that, oh, perhaps your sun is conjunct Mercury. So you're brainy, right? You got to combust there. And now you're still watching this person in the pillar, and you want to add the moon sign. So initially you're going to just look at who you are and how you express your moon sign, and what house it's in. Same thing as you just did before with the sun. And what aspects natally, and what transits are touching the moon. There's so many pluses to this, and there must be something that trips you up, right? So you're aware of all of it. The records are helping you see this with no judgment, just appreciation for who you are. And then you look at them together. You just ask the records to give you some insight as to, is there something karmic? Is there anything you need to know about having this pairing of the sun and moon? And now we want to bring in the North Node. Just North Node this time, not South Node. Same thing, let it have its own, its own, let the master and teachers comment on what does the North Node have to say about your purpose in life from the sign it's in, from the house. From how it's aspected. Kind of a review of, does it feel true? Have you been through a lot of stages with your North Node? Most people go through stages. The North Node almost, just like as we get older, we let go of so much, and the North Node can almost become irrelevant by the time we get to a certain age if we have worked with it, right? And no longer, we don't need to do that work anymore. So see what's going on here. And then see how how does it coordinate when it works with the sun and the moon? Does it create friction? Is it harmonious? Does it widen your experience? When you're an astrologer, there become aspects of your chart become like friends, right? You reference them. You use them for ways to explain, it's a way to understand yourself. And here you are in this turbocharged space of light and support. And see if you can see how these three working together are really helping you, even if they create friction, right? Okay, so now having made some discoveries, let's just witness the amazingness. Stay in that pillar. Awareness is being aware of itself, right? You're witnessing yourself. Witness the amazingness of who you are for a moment. I don't mean this to sound cheesy. This is a legitimate view from the records. This is a view of the Buddhists. It's the view of any spirituality worth its salt. Values every living thing and brings us, and we have this unique, amazing capacity to be aware of what it's like to be us. So part of this is the idea that this space on earth that you occupy right now, where you are in this moment, is dedicated to you and you alone. You are the only person like you on the planet, the only person with this astrological chart, right? Unique, perfect, and human all at the same time. And the records will teach you that the person that you are today is your soul's very best choice. Of all the possibilities for this lifetime and for all the astrological earmarks that are in your chart, this is what your soul chose as the ideal combination for your purposes in this life. We don't have to understand the whole thing now, but if you get a sense of this, then you realize that the records can really help you see this and see how all of this makes you a beautiful vehicle, a perfect vehicle for light and healing in this life for yourself and others. Just let that soak in for a moment, and then we will close the records. Okay, I'm going to read the closing prayer because I don't want to crash the Zoom anymore. I'll read it on behalf of all of us. I would like to thank the masters, teachers, and loved ones for their love and compassion. I would like to thank the lords of the Akashic Records for their point of view. And I would like to thank the Holy Spirit of Light for all knowledge and healing. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. The records are now closed. Amen. So if there's anybody wants to make notes, this is a great time. I know that was a lot. It was not meant to be a deep dive, but to give you a sense of what happens when these energies meet. So what is the potential, and yes, thank you, Shannon. I'm glad that was amazing for you. Yeah. Two amazing modalities, right? Coming together. Yeah. I'll continue to make some comments as you sort of process this. If you have anything to ask or comments to say, please go right ahead. One thing I have avoided is predictions. Linda Howe teaches that the Akashic Records is lousy for predictions. That doesn't prevent anybody from wanting them, right? We all hit the wall and, really are desperate to know how something's going to turn out. I have turned to astrology for predictions. My sister and I have really, we just, well, the progressions, well, the precess the equinox, um, then we kind of go right back to, well, the transits say, and we're still arguing to this day over what was the transit that occasioned my mother's passing. I have my opinion and she has hers. And I've had the best astrologer I know has said, death, you don't always see death in a transit or in a chart. So you're just going to have to live with that great mystery. But in truth, astrology can show patterns, can show that something's coming. But in terms of concrete predictions, then that is usually left to the reader, to the astrologer. And so that's an interpretation, and certainly that can be wrong, right? So part of this whole emphasis on how can this be good for me? How can I hold everything? How can I hold this big mess and that is life, and feel the goodness of life on top of that from that bigger perspective? It's a lessening of fear. And wanting a prediction is kind of based in fear, right? And once you get a prediction, then you're kind of like, I hope it's right. And who knows? You don't know. And so you haven't really lessened anybody's fear. You may have gotten some temporary reassurance if someone has said, don't worry, it's going to be fine. But a lot of times it's not fine. And so you have to get to a place of fine that is beyond that. So that's very much in line with what the records teaches, right? And every, whatever we're doing, whether we're giving an astrology reading or reading in the records, if we're in our own records, if we're looking at our own chart, there's a Buddhist term, Maitri. It's unconditional friendliness. Unconditional friendliness towards yourself. If you take nothing away from this session today, take that with you. Don't criticize. Don't, really trust that we're all in this together, and it does not matter. Of course, we have human imperfections, but give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. And lessening fear is a path to happiness. Lessening judgment. All of these modalities have a great role to play in that. So I kind of have come to the end of the material. There's a lot more that we could do, but I think I covered the basics. And again, if you have any questions or comments, we do have a few more minutes for that. So.
Does anyone have anything they want to ask or say?
Which planets are sextile?
Oh, so the moon and then the sun and then the north node.
In your chart?
Yeah,
Nice.
sure. they're at, the sun is at 3 degrees and the moon is at, and the north node are 1 degree.
Not very tight. Yeah.
No, moon
Nice.
is at 3, sun is at 4, and node is at 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
didn't know that. The records actually told me that.
Oh, really?
And
Oh,
I had to check
lovely.
it when I came out. I was like, holy cow. I mean, they didn't just
Lovely.
say that, but they showed them working in harmony really well. And when I came out, I looked at my chart and I was like, oh, I knew the sun and the moon were sextile, but then also then the north node is as well. And then that means that the moon is trining the north node, which is all very flowy because the moon and the north node are water signs.
Uh-huh.
A lot of flowing.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. So, the fun part of this is, when it's a smaller group, to have enough time to see what everybody's experience is and get to know each other a little bit more. Usually, if it's a small group, I have people come around and go around and introduce themselves. But it really was a lot of material to cover in a short period of time. But it has really been lovely working with you. There's, it's you guys are very sophisticated in your work, I can tell. So, yeah.
Thank
Mm,
you, Debbie. I
yeah.
really think that everyone got a lot out of this. This is, and you know it as well as I do, this is something you have to process.
Yeah.
You experience this and you go, oh my goodness, this was amazing. And then like a week later, you're still kind of getting thoughts and messages, and it's
Yeah.
not a one and done.
Yeah. Well, I do hope it wasn't like thinking from a fire hose. That's counterproductive, but yeah.
I think it was great. I think it was the right amount of like lecture and experience. And I'm pretty sure everybody here probably got something from being in the records. I can't wait to do this with transits.
Yeah.
I'm like
Lovely.
excited for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool. So I appreciate so much your time and all your energy in showing us this method. It's great.
Yes. I'm very happy I came. It was a great experience for me. So, yeah.
I told you, we have a very special group here.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the
Lovely.
energy is very, very good here. I love that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Like I said, we are very grateful that you came.
Thank you.
I'm going to cut off our recording now.
Mm-hmm.